The F-16 Fighting Falcon gleamed under the harsh Nevada sun, water cascading down its sleek fuselage as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos guided the high-pressure hose across its surface. At 26, she had perfected the art of aircraft maintenance, her movements precise and methodical as she worked her way around the multi-million-dollar machine. The flight line at Nellis Air Force Base buzzed with activity mechanics prepping aircraft, pilots conducting pre-flight checks, and the constant roar of jets taking off and landing. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maria paused, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her gloved hand. Something was wrong. The small black logbook that she always kept tucked in. Her cargo pocket was missing. Her heart raced as she patted down her uniform, checking every pocket twice. The logbook contained her most closely guarded secret detailed records of flight hours she wasn't supposed to have. Santos. The voice of Technical Sergeant Rodriguez cut through the engine noise. Base commander wants to see you. Now. Maria's blood turned to ice. Behind Rodriguez stood Colonel James Mitchell, the base commander himself, his weathered face unreadable beneath his flight cap. In his hand, he held a familiar black leather notebook. Her secret was out. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, the desert wind whipping at his uniform. Staff Sergeant Santos, I believe this belongs to you. He held up the logbook, its pages fluttering in the breeze. 732 flight hours. That's quite impressive for someone whose job description involves washing aircraft. Maria's throat went dry. 7 years of clandestine flights, borrowed time in cockpits she had no business occupying, and careful documentation of every minute in the air. All of it was about to come crashing down. She had always known this day might come, but she had never imagined it would feel like standing on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to run. Sir, I can explain. Can you? Mitchell's steel-gray eyes fixed on hers. Because according to your personnel file, you've never set foot in a cockpit. Yet this logbook tells a very different story. It tells the story of someone who's been flying military aircraft without authorization for years. The maintenance crew had stopped working, their attention drawn to the confrontation unfolding on the flight line. Maria felt their stares burning into her back. Some looked curious, others shocked, but a few those who had worked closely with her wore expressions of dawning understanding. They had always wondered how she seemed to know so much about aircraft systems, how she could diagnose problems. That stumped veteran mechanics. How she moved around the jets with an almost intuitive understanding of their capabilities. Now they knew why. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to thank you for watching. Creating and narrating these detailed, novel-length stories takes tremendous time and research to bring you the most engaging content possible. We're embarking on a journey of nearly 50,000 words together. That's a full novella. If you're already hooked by what you've heard, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who would enjoy it, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. This is going to be an epic adventure, so get comfortable. And let's continue with this remarkable tale. Maria Santos had never intended to become a thief of flight hours. It had started innocently enough 7 years earlier, when she was a fresh-faced 19-year-old airman first class, newly assigned to the 57th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron at Nellis. She had grown up in a small town outside Phoenix, the daughter of a mechanic who had taught her that understanding how something worked meant you could fix it, improve it, or in some cases, make it do things it wasn't supposed to do. Her father, Miguel Santos, had been a crew chief in the Air Force during the Gulf War, and his stories of fighter jets and the brave pilots who flew them had shaped Maria's childhood dreams. But when she tried to enlist as a pilot candidate, the recruiter had been blunt. Her family couldn't afford the college degree required for officer training, And her eyesight, while perfectly adequate for most purposes, fell just short of the pilot requirements. "But you've got good hands and a sharp mind," the recruiter had said. "Aircraft maintenance is where the real expertise lies. Pilots just drive the bus maintainers, make sure it flies." So Maria had enlisted as a maintainer, telling herself it was better to be close to the aircraft she loved than not to be around them at all. She threw herself into technical school, mastering hydraulics, avionics, and propulsion systems with an intensity that impressed her instructors. By the time she arrived at Nellis, she could disassemble and rebuild a jet engine blindfolded. The first time she climbed into a cockpit had been purely professional. Captain Sarah Chun, one of the Thunderbird's demonstration pilots, had been having trouble with her stick response during high-G maneuvers. The avionics technicians had run every diagnostic they could think of, but the problem persisted. Santos, Chief Master Sergeant Williams, had called her over. "You've been working on this bird for 3 days. Any ideas?" Maria had studied the technical manuals until her eyes burned, but something wasn't adding up. "Sir, I'd like to check the feel of the controls myself. Sometimes there are issues that don't show up in diagnostics." Williams had hesitated. Maintainers weren't supposed to operate aircraft systems beyond what was necessary for maintenance procedures. But Maria had already proven herself to be exceptional, and the Thunderbirds had a show in 2 days. 5 minutes, he had said. "Check whatever you need to check." Sitting in the cockpit of the F-16 for the first time, Maria had felt something click into place. The controls felt natural under her hands, the instrument panel made intuitive sense, and when she moved the stick, she could feel the subtle binding that was causing Captain Chun's problems. It was a worn bushing in the control linkage, something that would only manifest under the specific pressures of high-G flight. But more than solving the technical problem, those 5 minutes in the cockpit had awakened something in Maria that she couldn't ignore. This was where she belonged. The opportunity to actually fly had come 6 months later, in the form of Master Sergeant Jake Thompson. Thompson was a loadmaster on C-130 cargo aircraft, but he had civilian pilot's license and access to the base's flight training aircraft during off hours. More importantly, he believed that the best maintainers were those who understood what it felt like to be in the air. "You want to really understand these birds?" he had asked Maria one evening as they secured a freshly serviced T-38 trainer. "You need to feel what they do up there." Thompson had been breaking regulations for years, taking select maintainers up for unauthorized orientation flights. He was careful about it, only the most trustworthy personnel, only during periods when the flight line was quiet, and only with aircraft that were already scheduled for test flights. He falsified flight logs, created phantom training missions, and had developed a network of sympathetic air traffic controllers who looked the other way. "The brass doesn't understand," Thompson had explained as he walked Maria through pre-flight procedures on a moonless Tuesday night. "They think keeping maintainers on the ground makes them better at their jobs. But how can you properly service something you've never experienced?" Maria's first flight had been a revelation. Sitting in the rear seat of the T-38 as Thompson guided the sleek trainer into the night sky above the Mojave Desert, she had finally understood what all her technical knowledge had been building toward. The physics she had studied in textbooks came alive as she felt the G-forces pressing her into her seat during turns, experienced the precise balance of thrust and lift that kept them airborne, and witnessed firsthand how the systems she maintained daily performed under the stress of actual flight. "Feel that?" Thompson had called back to her as he rolled the aircraft inverted. "That's your hydraulic system working perfectly. Every seal you've replaced, every line you've bled, this is what it's all for." When they landed an hour later, Maria knew her life had changed forever. But Thompson had been clear about the rules. "What happened tonight never happened," he had said as they conducted post-flight procedures. "You were never in this aircraft. But if you want to really become the best maintainer you can be, there will be other opportunities. Over the following months, Maria had flown with Thompson dozens of times. She learned to read instruments, understand weather patterns, and feel the subtle changes in aircraft performance that indicated potential problems. But more than that, she had begun to log her own flight hours in a small black notebook, documenting every minute in the air. The transition from passenger to pilot had been gradual. Thompson had started by letting Maria handle the controls during straight and level flight, teaching her how to maintain altitude and heading. Her natural aptitude was obvious from the beginning. She had an intuitive feel for the aircraft that some pilots never developed. "You've got it," Thompson had said one night, 6 months into their clandestine partnership. "Whatever it is, you've got it." Within a year, Maria was capable of taking off and landing the T-38 under Thompson's supervision. She studied flight manuals during her off-duty hours, memorized emergency procedures, and practiced radio communications. Thompson introduced her to other members of his informal network, a handful of enlisted personnel who shared his belief that traditional boundaries between pilots and maintainers were artificial and counterproductive. There was Senior Airman Marcus Webb, a weapons loader who had been secretly flying for 3 years and had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of air-to-air combat tactics. Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, an avionics specialist who had logged over 200 hours in fighter aircraft and could execute aerobatic maneuvers that impressed seasoned pilots. And Technical Sergeant David Park, a propulsion specialist who had taught himself to fly helicopters and had become Thompson's go-to instructor for rotary wing orientation. Together, they formed a shadow air force within the official structure of Nellis Air Force Base. They met informally in the base library, discussing flight theory and sharing lessons learned. They created their own training program, with senior members mentoring newcomers and everyone contributing their specialized knowledge to the group's collective understanding. "We're not rebels," Thompson had explained to Maria during one of their library sessions. "We're innovators. The Air Force talks about breaking down barriers between specialties, but they don't follow through. We're showing what's possible when maintainers truly understand what they're maintaining." But the more Maria flew, the more she wanted to push the boundaries. The T-38 trainer was an excellent aircraft for learning basic piloting skills, but her maintenance duties exposed her daily to far more sophisticated machines. She worked on F-16 Fighting Falcons, F-15 Eagles, and A-10 Thunderbolts, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to fly these powerful combat aircraft. The opportunity to fly fighters came through an unexpected source: Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the squadron operations officer. Hayes was a pilot with over 2,000 hours in F-16s, but she was also a realist who understood that the best maintainers were those with practical flying experience. Hayes had noticed Maria's exceptional troubleshooting abilities and her uncanny knack for understanding pilot complaints that other maintainers struggled to diagnose. When a persistent flutter in the F-16's control surfaces had stumped the entire maintenance team, Maria had suggested it might be related to the pilot's flying technique rather than a mechanical problem. "Show me what you mean," Hayes had said, leading Maria to the simulator. In the F-16 simulator, Maria had demonstrated the control inputs that would produce the flutter the pilots were experiencing. Her handling of the simulated aircraft was so smooth and natural that Hayes immediately suspected Maria had more flying experience than her personnel file indicated. "Santos," Hayes had said after Maria completed the simulation, "where did you learn to fly?" Maria had frozen, realizing she had revealed too much. But instead of anger, she saw curiosity in Hayes' eyes. After a long conversation in Hayes' office, with the door closed and the colonel's assurance that their discussion was off the record, Maria had revealed the extent of her clandestine flying experience. Hayes had listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to admiration to concern. "You realize what you've been doing could result in court-martial?" Hayes had finally said. "Yes, ma'am. But you also realize that you've probably learned more about these aircraft than most pilots know." "I hope so, ma'am." Hayes had been quiet for a long moment, staring out her office window at the flight line where Maria spent her days maintaining the fighter she flew in secret. "There's a program," Hayes had finally said. "It's not official, and it's not something we talk about publicly. But there are ways to give exceptional maintainers actual flight experience in the aircraft they service. It requires very careful handling, and it requires trust." What Hayes was proposing was far more sophisticated than Thompson's informal network. This was a systematic program that involved senior officers, careful documentation, and coordination with air traffic control. It was still technically against regulations, but it was conducted with such precision and attention to safety that it had been operating for years without incident. "The theory is simple," Hayes had explained. "A maintainer who has actually flown. An aircraft understands its systems in ways that no amount of ground training can provide. They can diagnose problems faster, suggest more effective solutions, and catch issues before they become serious." The program operated under the cover of functional check flights, test flights, conducted after major maintenance to ensure aircraft systems were operating properly. Hayes and a select group of other senior pilots would take maintainers along on these flights, gradually increasing their responsibilities until they were capable of flying the aircraft themselves. "But there are rules," Hayes had emphasized. "Strict rules. You never fly alone. You never take unnecessary risks. You never discuss this with anyone outside the program. And you maintain detailed logs of every flight hour, because if this ever comes to light, we need to be able to demonstrate that it was conducted professionally and safely." The black leather logbook had been Hayes' idea. If Maria was going to fly fighters, she needed to maintain proper documentation of her flight time, just like any other pilot. The logbook would serve as both a record of her growing experience and protection if questions were ever raised about her activities. "This stays with you at all times," Hayes had said, handing Maria the pristine logbook. "Every flight, every hour, every aircraft type. Date, time, duration, aircraft tail number, and mission profile. If you're going to be a pilot, you're going to act like one." Maria's first flight in an F-16 had been a transformative experience. Sitting in the single seat of the Fighting Falcon, she had felt the raw power of the Pratt & Whitney F-100 engine as Hayes guided her through engine start procedures from the ground via radio. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision and authority that the T-38 trainer couldn't match. "Viper 1, you're cleared for taxi," came the call from the tower. Using the F-16's unofficial call sign, Maria had taxied the fighter to the end of the runway, her hands steady on the controls, despite her racing heart. This was what she had dreamed of since childhood, actually piloting one of the Air Force's premier fighters. "Remember," Hayes' voice crackled through the radio, "smooth inputs, trust your training, and don't try to impress anyone. Just fly the aircraft." The takeoff had been flawless. As the F-16 lifted off the runway and climbed into the clear Nevada sky, Maria had felt a sense of completion that she had never experienced before. This was where she belonged. Over the following months, Maria had logged hours in F-16s, F-15s, and even the A-10 Thunderbolt II. Each aircraft had its own personality and challenges, but she adapted quickly, her maintainers understanding of the systems giving her insights that traditional pilot training often missed. Her logbook grew thicker with each flight, documenting a comprehensive flying career that officially didn't exist. She recorded everything: formation flights, air-to-air intercepts, close air support missions, and advanced tactical maneuvers. She flew in all weather conditions, at all hours of the day and night, building the kind of comprehensive experience that typically took years of official pilot training to acquire, but she also maintained her cover as a maintainer. By day, she continued to service the same aircraft she flew at night, her dual perspective making her increasingly valuable to both the maintenance squadron and the pilots who relied on her expertise. Word of Maria's exceptional abilities spread quietly through the unofficial channels that connected maintainers and pilots throughout the Air Force. She began receiving invitations to visit other bases, ostensibly for technical consultations, but actually to share her unique insights with other members of the growing shadow network. At Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, she flew with Major Robert Chun, a former Thunderbird pilot who had been conducting his own clandestine maintainer training program. At Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, she participated in weapons testing flights, her maintainer's knowledge of ordnance systems providing valuable perspective on how new weapons performed in actual combat conditions. Each base she visited added entries to her logbook. She flew F-22 Raptors at Tyndall, F-35 Lightning E's at Hill, and even got cockpit time in the stealthy B-2 Spirit at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Her logbook became a testament to an aviation career that spanned multiple aircraft types, combat scenarios, and operational environments. But the network wasn't just about flying. Maria and her colleagues were conducting an informal but comprehensive study of how aircraft systems performed under operational conditions. They documented problems that weren't appearing in official maintenance reports, identified design flaws that only became apparent during extended flight operations, and developed innovative solutions to chronic maintenance issues. We're not just pilots, Major Chun had explained during one of their technical discussions at Luke. We're a bridge between the maintenance world and the flying world. We understand both sides in ways that traditional organizational structures don't allow. Their insights were filtering back into the official maintenance community through carefully worded technical reports and suggestion programs. Problems were being solved, aircraft availability was improving, and maintenance costs were decreasing, all because a small group of maintainers had gained practical flying experience that informed their ground-based work. Not every flight went smoothly. During a training mission at Nellis, flying an F-15 Eagle in formation with Hayes, Maria had experienced her first serious in-flight emergency. A hydraulic failure had left her with severely limited control authority, and she had been forced to execute an emergency landing with Hayes talking her through every step of the process. "Viper 2, you're doing great," Hayes had said over the radio as Maria lined up for final approach. "Keep your inputs small and smooth. The aircraft will do most of the work." Maria had managed to get the F-15 on the ground safely, but the incident had shaken both her and Hayes. Emergency situations were when the differences between trained pilots and talented amateurs became most apparent. And Maria's lack of formal emergency procedures training had nearly resulted in disaster. "We need to address this," Hayes had said during their debrief. "You're an exceptional pilot, but there are gaps in your training that could be dangerous." Hayes had arranged for Maria to receive intensive emergency procedures training from retired Air Force pilots who were working as civilian contractors on the base. Officially, this was cross-training to help her better understand pilot perspectives on maintenance issues. Unofficially, it was pilot training that covered everything from engine failures to combat damage assessment. Another close call had come during a night formation flight with Thompson in T-38s. Poor weather had moved in faster than expected, and they had found themselves flying in conditions that were marginal for experienced pilots, let alone for someone with Maria's informal background. "We need to get on the ground," Thompson had said over the intercom. Now, the approach to Nellis had been conducted in heavy rain with limited visibility. Maria had been flying the lead aircraft, with Thompson providing guidance from the back seat, but the responsibility for getting them down safely had ultimately been hers. She had executed a precision approach that impressed even Thompson, but the experience had highlighted how quickly flying could turn dangerous. "That's why we keep detailed logs," Thompson had explained after they were safely on the ground. "If something had gone wrong tonight, we would have needed to document exactly what happened and why. The logbook isn't just a record, it's protection." These incidents had reinforced the importance of the documentation Maria was maintaining. Every flight carried risk, and every risk needed to be carefully managed and recorded. We're deep into this incredible story now, and I hope you're as captivated as I am by these unfolding events. The amount of effort that goes into researching, writing, and narrating these novel-length stories is immense. We're talking about creating content equivalent to a published book. But it's worth it to bring you stories that truly engage and transport you to another world. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please take a second to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate great storytelling. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating these detailed, epic narratives. We still have so much more to discover together. So let's see how this situation unfolds. By her 4th year at Nellis, Maria had achieved something remarkable. She had become one of the most respected maintainers on the base, while simultaneously accumulating more flight hours than many active pilots. Her official personnel record showed steady advancement through the enlisted ranks, with consistently outstanding performance evaluations and recommendations for increased responsibility. But it was her unofficial record that truly set her apart. The black logbook now contained over 400 hours of flight time across multiple aircraft types, representing a level of cross-platform experience that was rare even among career pilots. She had flown air-to-air intercept missions, close air support sorties, reconnaissance flights, and tactical training exercises that spanned the full spectrum of Air Force operations. Her promotion to Staff Sergeant had come with assignment as a crew chief, giving her responsibility for specific aircraft and their maintenance teams. This position provided even greater access to the fighters she serviced, and more opportunities to identify maintenance issues that could only be properly understood from a pilot's perspective. "Santos is the best crew chief I've ever worked with," Captain Jennifer Walsh had written in her fitness report. "She has an intuitive understanding of aircraft systems that allows her to anticipate problems before they occur and resolve issues. That stumped more experienced personnel." What Captain Walsh didn't know was that Maria's intuitive understanding came from actually flying the aircraft she maintained. When she diagnosed a subtle vibration in the F-16's control system, she wasn't just relying on technical manuals. She was drawing from her experience of feeling that same vibration through the stick during high-G maneuvers. The arrival of Colonel James Mitchell as base commander had initially seemed like a positive development for Maria and her network. Mitchell was a career fighter pilot with a reputation for innovation and a willingness to challenge traditional approaches to training and operations. He had implemented new maintenance procedures at his previous assignment that had significantly improved aircraft availability, and his approach seemed to align with the philosophy behind the informal maintainer pilot program. But Mitchell was also a stickler for regulations and accountability. He had a reputation for conducting surprise inspections, reviewing personnel files in detail, and asking probing questions about unusual activities or unexplained patterns in base operations. "The new commander is asking a lot of questions," Hayes had warned Maria during one of their monthly coordination meetings. "He's been reviewing flight logs, maintenance records, and personnel assignments. We need to be extra careful." Mitchell's attention to detail had already resulted in several policy changes that affected the network's operations. He had instituted new requirements for flight plan documentation, increased security procedures for aircraft access, and begun conducting random audits of maintenance activities. "He's not targeting us specifically," Thompson had said during an emergency meeting of the network's core members. But his style of leadership is going to make it much harder to operate under the radar. The group had decided to reduce their flying activities temporarily, assessed Mitchell's leadership style, and determined how to adapt their operations to the new environment. But for Maria, who had become accustomed to regular flight time, the forced reduction in flying was frustrating. Maria's first indication that she was under scrutiny came during what seemed like a routine interaction with Colonel Mitchell. She had been conducting a pre-flight inspection on an F-16 when Mitchell had approached, apparently conducting one of his informal walks around the flight line. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Mitchell had said, stopping beside the aircraft. "I've been hearing excellent things about your work." "Thank you, sir. Tell me, what's your assessment of this aircraft's condition?" Maria had launched into a detailed technical discussion of the F-16 systems, pointing out recent maintenance actions and explaining her inspection findings. But as she spoke, she noticed Mitchell watching her with unusual intensity, as if he were evaluating not just her technical knowledge but something else. "You seem very familiar with this aircraft's handling characteristics," Mitchell had observed. "More so than I would expect from ground-based experience alone." Maria had felt a chill of warning but had maintained her composure. "I study the pilot reports carefully, sir. Understanding how the aircraft performs helps me anticipate maintenance requirements." "I'm sure it does," Mitchell had replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Over the following weeks, Maria had noticed increased attention from base security and administrative personnel. Her work schedule was being monitored more closely, her access to aircraft was being tracked, and she had been asked to participate in several routine interviews about base security procedures. "They're building a file on you," Hayes had warned her during a carefully orchestrated chance encounter in the base commissary. "Mitchell suspects something, but he doesn't know what yet." The investigation was being conducted subtly, but Maria could feel the net tightening around her activities. Security cameras that had previously been ignored were now being monitored actively. Flight line access procedures that had been routinely circumvented were being enforced strictly, and personnel who had been sympathetic to the maintainer pilot program were distancing themselves from potential controversy. Despite the increased scrutiny, Maria's reputation as a technical expert continued to grow. When a visiting F-22 Raptor developed a mysterious flight control problem that grounded the aircraft for over a week, she had been called in to consult on the issue. The F-22's pilot, Major Sandra Phillips, had reported intermittent control responses during high angle of attack maneuvers. The aircraft's sophisticated flight control computers weren't registering any faults, but Phillips insisted that something was wrong with the way the aircraft responded to her inputs. "I've flown Raptors for 8 years," Phillips had explained to the assembled maintenance team. "This aircraft isn't flying right." 3 different maintenance teams had examined the F-22's flight control systems without finding any problems. The technical manual suggested no obvious solutions, and the aircraft manufacturer's technical representatives were stumped. Maria had requested permission to examine the aircraft personally, and her analysis had focused on the interaction between the pilot's inputs and the computer systems that translated those inputs into control surface movements. But to truly understand the problem, she needed to experience it firsthand. Working with Major Phillips and a sympathetic test pilot, Maria had managed to arrange an unofficial flight in the F-22 during what was officially recorded as a functional check flight. Sitting in the single seat of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, she had replicated the maneuvers that Phillips had described. The problem became immediately apparent. A subtle software glitch was causing a barely perceptible delay in control response during specific flight conditions. It wasn't enough to trigger the aircraft's fault detection systems, but it was enough to affect pilot confidence during critical maneuvers. "There," Maria had said over the radio during her 3rd high angle of attack sequence. "Did you feel that hesitation?" The test pilot, monitoring from the ground, had initially been skeptical. but Maria's detailed description of the control response anomaly, combined with her suggestions for diagnostic procedures, had led to the discovery of a software bug that had been affecting multiple F-22s across the Air Force. Her solution to the F-22 problem had earned her base-wide recognition and a commendation from Colonel Mitchell himself. But it had also raised questions about how a maintainer could have developed such sophisticated understanding of advanced flight control systems. The investigation into Maria's activities was beginning to affect more than just her professional life. Her relationship with Technical Sergeant Carlos Mendez, a radar technician she had been dating for 2 years, was coming under strain as the increased scrutiny made their interactions more complicated. Carlos knew about Maria's flying activities. Would have been impossible to hide her frequent absences and technical knowledge from someone she was close to, but he had always assumed it was a relatively minor breach of regulations, not the comprehensive shadow career she had actually built. How many hours are we talking about? Carlos had asked during a tense conversation in Maria's off-base apartment. When Maria had shown him the logbook, Carlos had been stunned by the scope of her activities. Over 600 hours spanning multiple aircraft types, detailed documentation of combat maneuvers and advanced tactical procedures, and evidence of a network that included personnel from multiple bases. "Maria, this isn't just bending rules," Carlos had said, flipping through pages of flight entries. "This is a complete parallel career. If this comes out, you're looking at court-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe even criminal charges." But Carlos's concern went beyond the legal implications. As a radar technician, he understood how aircraft movements were tracked and documented. Maria's flying activities had required extensive coordination with air traffic control, flight operations, and security personnel. The network she was part of had necessarily involved dozens of people across multiple levels of the Air Force hierarchy. "Someone's going to talk," Carlos had warned. "With this many people involved, someone's going to make a mistake or get scared and reveal everything." Maria knew he was right, but she also knew that backing down now would mean giving up the most meaningful part of her Air Force career. The flying wasn't just a hobby or an interesting challenge. It had become central to her identity and her contribution to the service. "I'm helping to make our aircraft safer and more effective," she had argued. "Everything I've learned in the cockpit makes me better at my job on the ground. But is it worth your career?" That question haunted Maria as the investigation continued to intensify around her. As Colonel Mitchell's investigation deepened, it became clear that Maria's activities were part of a much larger phenomenon than anyone had initially realized. The maintainer pilot network that had started as an informal training program at Nellis had evolved into a multi-base operation, involving hundreds of personnel across the Air Force. The investigation had begun when Mitchell noticed discrepancies in fuel consumption reports that didn't match official flight schedules. Aircraft were logging more flight hours than could be accounted for by scheduled training missions and operational sorties. When he had cross-referenced these anomalies with maintenance records and personnel assignments, patterns had emerged that suggested systematic unauthorized flying. "This isn't just a few maintainers taking joyrides," Mitchell had explained to his deputy commander during a classified briefing. "This is an organized program that's been operating for years." The scope of the network was staggering. It included crew chiefs who were qualified to fly the fighters they maintained, weapons loaders who had become expert in air-to-air combat tactics, avionics technicians who understood radar systems from both operational and maintenance perspectives, and support personnel who had developed capabilities that officially didn't exist. At some bases, the unauthorized flying program had become so sophisticated that it was effectively running parallel to the official pilot training pipeline. Maintainers were receiving instruction that rivaled formal flight training, accumulating experience in advanced aircraft that many career pilots never had the opportunity to fly. But the program had also been operating with remarkable safety and effectiveness. Accident rates among the unofficial pilots were actually lower than those of traditional pilot training programs, and the maintenance quality at bases where the program operated was consistently superior to Air Force averages. They know these aircraft better than anyone, Master Sergeant Williams, the maintenance chief, had admitted when Mitchell had confronted him about the program. A maintainer who's actually flown an F-16 can diagnose problems that would take other technicians days to figure out. As news of the investigation spread through the network, attempts began to minimize evidence and protect key personnel. Flight logs were altered retroactively, maintenance records were adjusted to eliminate discrepancies, and participants were coached on how to respond to questioning. Thompson, as one of the network's founding members, had taken charge of the damage control efforts. He had developed contingency plans for exactly this scenario, including procedures for destroying evidence, coordinating alibis, and transferring key personnel to other assignments before they could be questioned. The priority is protecting the people, Thompson had told the network's leadership during an emergency meeting. Documents can be replaced, but careers can't be rebuilt once they're destroyed. But the cover-up efforts were hampered by the comprehensive nature of the documentation that participants had maintained. Maria's logbook was just one of dozens that existed throughout the network, and the detailed records that had been intended to demonstrate professionalism and safety were now evidence of widespread regulatory violations. Hayes had been torn between her loyalty to the program and her obligations as an officer. She believed strongly in the value of what they had been doing, but she also understood the serious legal and professional consequences that everyone involved would face if the full extent of the program became known. "We can minimize this," she had told Maria during a private meeting. "If we're careful about what we admit to and what we deny, we might be able to characterize this as isolated incidents rather than a systematic program." But Maria had resisted the suggestion that she should destroy her logbook or claim that her flying activities had been more limited than they actually were. The logbook represented years of dedication and achievement that she was proud of, regardless of the regulatory violations involved. "I'm not going to lie about what I've accomplished," Maria had said. "If they want to court-martial me for becoming a better maintainer, then that's what they'll have to do." The investigation took a dramatic turn when Senior Airman Jennifer Moore, a fuel systems technician who had been excluded from the flying program, came forward with detailed information about the network's operations. Moore had been bitter about her exclusion from the program and had been documenting unauthorized activities for months, hoping to use the information to force her inclusion or to gain leverage with supervisors. Moore's information was comprehensive and damaging. She had photographed aircraft with maintainers in the cockpits during off hours, recorded conversations about unauthorized flights, and documented the movement of personnel and aircraft that couldn't be explained by official schedules. "I know exactly who's been flying and when," Moore had told Colonel Mitchell during her formal deposition. "Staff Sergeant Santos alone has been up in fighters dozens of times. They think they're better than the rest of us, but they're just criminals." Moore's testimony provided Mitchell with the evidence he needed to expand his investigation beyond fuel discrepancies and maintenance anomalies. Armed with specific dates, times, and personnel involved, he began conducting targeted interviews and document reviews that quickly confirmed the existence of the unauthorized flying program. The revelation that Moore had been actively documenting the network's activities for months sent shockwaves through the participants. They realized that their operational security had been compromised much earlier than they had suspected, and that attempts at cover-up were likely futile. "She's got everything," Thompson had warned Maria during an encrypted phone call. "Photos, recordings, flight schedules, enough to hang all of us." But Moore's motivations for coming forward were more complex than simple whistleblowing. During her interviews with investigators, It became clear that she was hoping to negotiate immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation, and that she wanted to be included in any official version of the maintainer pilot program that might emerge from the investigation. The story broke in the national media 3 weeks after Moore's initial testimony, when a reporter from Air Force Times received an anonymous tip about widespread unauthorized flying at multiple Air Force bases. The initial article, titled "Shadow Pilots, Maintainers Flying Military Aircraft Without Authorization," sent shockwaves through the Pentagon and triggered congressional inquiries. For years, Air Force maintainers have been conducting unauthorized flights in sophisticated military aircraft, the article began. Sources indicate that hundreds of enlisted personnel have accumulated thousands of flight hours in fighters, bombers, and support aircraft without proper training or authorization. The media coverage was sensational and largely negative, focusing on the regulatory violations and potential safety risks, while largely ignoring the program's achievements and safety record. Television news reports featured dramatic footage of military aircraft accompanied by ominous narration about rogue pilots and security breaches. Maria watched the coverage from her off-base apartment, feeling a mixture of anger and resignation as her life's work was characterized as criminal behavior. The reporters seemed to have no understanding of the technical knowledge and safety procedures that had governed the program, or the genuine improvements in aircraft maintenance that had resulted from it. "They're making us sound like joyriders," Carlos had said, watching a particularly sensationalized news report, "like we were just stealing aircraft for fun." The media attention intensified the pressure on Air Force leadership to take decisive action. Congressional representatives began demanding investigations, and senior Pentagon officials found themselves answering questions about how such a widespread program could have operated without official knowledge. Secretary of the Air Force Patricia Johnson appeared before the House Armed Services Committee to address the situation. "We take these allegations very seriously," she had testified. "Any unauthorized use of military aircraft represents a breach of security and safety protocols that cannot be tolerated." But behind the public condemnation, some Air Force leaders were quietly impressed by what the maintainer pilot program had accomplished. The quality of aircraft maintenance at affected bases was demonstrably superior, and several innovative maintenance procedures that had been developed by the program were already being adopted officially across the service. As the investigation expanded into a formal legal proceeding, Maria found herself needing to hire civilian legal representation. The Air Force had appointed a military defense counsel, Captain Robert Chang, but the scope of potential charges was serious enough that additional expertise was advisable. The civilian attorney Maria selected, Susan Martinez, was a former Air Force JAG officer who had specialized in military aviation law. Martinez's initial assessment of Maria's situation was sobering but not without hope. "The charges they're contemplating are serious," Martinez had explained during their first meeting. "Unauthorized use of government property, violation of flight safety regulations, conspiracy to circumvent military authority. Any of these could result in court-martial and imprisonment." But Martinez had also identified potential defenses based on the program's safety record, its contributions to aircraft maintenance quality, and the lack of any criminal intent or personal gain on Maria's part. "You weren't stealing aircraft or joyriding," Martinez had said. "You were participating in what you reasonably believed was an approved training program that made you better at your job. That's not the profile of a criminal." The defense strategy would focus on demonstrating that the maintainer pilot program had been conducted professionally, safely, and with the knowledge and tacit approval of senior leadership. They would argue that the program represented innovation and initiative rather than criminal behavior, but building this defense would require cooperation from other network participants, many of whom were facing their own legal jeopardy and might not be willing to testify on Maria's behalf. The informal leadership structure that had made the program effective was now working against the participants as they faced individual legal consequences. The investigation had split Nellis Air Force Base into competing factions. Traditional maintainers who had never participated in the flying program were angry about being excluded and suspicious about potential favoritism. Pilots were divided between those who admired the maintainers' dedication and skill, and those who saw their activities as unprofessional encroachment on pilot territory. Senior leadership was caught between recognizing the program's achievements and enforcing military discipline. Many officers privately admitted that the maintainer pilot program had produced exceptional results, but they were constrained by regulations and the need to maintain order and authority. "I wish we could have found a way to make this official," Colonel Hayes had confided to Maria during one of their last conversations before Hayes was transferred to another assignment. "What you all accomplished was remarkable, but the way it was done puts everyone in an impossible position." The base's operational tempo had been disrupted by the investigation. Key maintainers were being reassigned or restricted from flight. Line duties and the loss of their expertise was affecting aircraft availability and maintenance quality. Some of the innovative procedures that had been developed by the program were being abandoned. Even though they had proven effective, Maria found herself increasingly isolated as colleagues distanced themselves from association with the investigation. Friendships that had been built over years of shared work and mutual respect were strained by the legal and professional pressures everyone was facing. "People are scared," Senior Airman Davis, one of Maria's former team members, had explained. "They don't know who's going to be charged next or what they should say if they're questioned." The atmosphere of suspicion and fear was exactly what the maintainer pilot program had sought to overcome, barriers between different specialties and levels of authority that prevented the free exchange of information and expertise. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As more details of the maintainer pilot program became public, international allies and adversaries began paying attention to what the unauthorized flying revealed about American military capabilities and security procedures. Foreign intelligence services were analyzing the leaked information for insights into Air Force operations and training methods. The fact that maintainers had been successfully flying advanced combat aircraft raised questions about the security of sensitive technologies and the effectiveness of personnel screening procedures. If enlisted personnel could gain unauthorized access to sophisticated fighters and bombers, what did that suggest about the protection of classified systems and information? "This has implications beyond just the personnel involved," a senior Pentagon official had said during a classified briefing to congressional leaders. "Foreign governments are asking questions about our security procedures and the reliability of our technology transfer agreements." Some allied nations had maintainer pilot programs that operated with official approval, and they were privately sharing information about their experiences with Pentagon officials. The Israeli Air Force in particular had long recognized the value of cross-training between pilots and maintainers, and their official programs had produced many of the same benefits that the unauthorized American program had achieved. The Israelis have been doing this openly for decades, Martinez had pointed out during her research into potential defenses. Their maintenance quality and pilot situational awareness are among the best in the world, partly because of integrated training programs. This international perspective provided additional evidence that the maintainer pilot concept was sound, even if the specific implementation at American bases had violated regulations. The stress of the investigation was taking a toll on Maria's personal relationships. Her romance with Carlos had become increasingly tense as the legal implications became clearer, and her family was struggling to understand how their daughter had become involved in such a high-profile military scandal. I don't understand why you couldn't just do your job, Maria's mother, Elena Santos, had said during a difficult phone conversation. We're so proud of you for serving, but now the whole family is worried about what's going to happen. Maria's father, Miguel, had been more understanding. As a former Air Force maintainer himself, he appreciated the technical challenges and professional dedication that had motivated his daughter's involvement in the program. You were trying to be the best at what you do, Miguel had said. I can't fault you for that, even if the way you went about it caused problems. But even Miguel was concerned about the legal and career consequences Maria was facing. The possibility of court-martial and dishonorable discharge would affect not just Maria's future, but her family's reputation in their tight-knit military community. Carlos had been struggling with his own divided loyalties. He supported Maria personally, but his position as a radar technician made him uncomfortable with the regulatory violations involved in the maintainer pilot program. I believe in following orders and respecting authority, Carlos had explained. During one of their increasingly frequent arguments, what you all were doing undermines the whole system of military discipline. But the system was preventing us from doing our jobs as well as we could, Maria had countered. We were making aircraft safer and more effective. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Their relationship was reflecting the broader tensions that the investigation had created throughout the Air Force, conflicts between innovation and discipline, between individual initiative and institutional authority, between what was technically possible and what was officially permitted. The civilian attorney Maria selected, Susan Martinez, was a former Air Force JAG officer who had specialized in military aviation law. Martinez's initial assessment of Maria's situation was sobering but not without hope. The charges they're contemplating are serious, Martinez had explained during their first meeting. Unauthorized use of government property, violation of flight safety regulations, conspiracy to circumvent military authority. Any of these could result in court-martial and imprisonment. But Martinez had also identified potential defenses based on the program's safety record, its contributions to aircraft maintenance quality, and the lack of any criminal intent or personal gain on Maria's part. You weren't stealing aircraft or joyriding, Martinez had said. You were participating in what you reasonably believed was an approved training program that made you better at your job. That's not the profile of a criminal. The defense strategy would focus on demonstrating that the maintainer pilot program had been conducted professionally, safely, and with the knowledge and tacit approval of senior leadership. They would argue that the program represented innovation and initiative rather than criminal behavior, but building this defense would require cooperation from other network participants, many of whom were facing their own legal jeopardy and might not be willing to testify on Maria's behalf. The informal leadership structure that had made the program effective was now working against the participants as they faced individual legal consequences. The investigation had split Nellis Air Force Base into competing factions. Traditional maintainers who had never participated in the flying program were angry about being excluded and suspicious about potential favoritism. Pilots were divided between those who admired the maintainers' dedication and skill, and those who saw their activities as unprofessional encroachment on pilot territory. Senior leadership was caught between recognizing the program's achievements and enforcing military discipline. Many officers privately admitted that the maintainer pilot program had produced exceptional results, but they were constrained by regulations and the need to maintain order and authority. I wish we could have found a way to make this official, Colonel Hayes had confided to Maria during one of their last conversations before Hayes was transferred to another assignment. What you all accomplished was remarkable, but the way it was done puts everyone in an impossible position. The base's operational tempo had been disrupted by the investigation. Key maintainers were being reassigned or restricted from flight. Line duties and the loss of their expertise was affecting aircraft availability and maintenance quality. Some of the innovative procedures that had been developed by the program were being abandoned. Even though they had proven effective, Maria found herself increasingly isolated as colleagues distanced themselves from association with the investigation. Friendships that had been built over years of shared work and mutual respect were strained by the legal and professional pressures everyone was facing. "People are scared," Senior Airman Davis, one of Maria's former team members, had explained. "They don't know who's going to be charged next or what they should say if they're questioned." The atmosphere of suspicion and fear was exactly what the maintainer pilot program had sought to overcome, barriers between different specialties and levels of authority that prevented the free exchange of information and expertise. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As more details of the maintainer pilot program became public, international allies and adversaries began paying attention to what the unauthorized flying revealed about American military capabilities and security procedures. Foreign intelligence services were analyzing the leaked information for insights into Air Force operations and training methods. The fact that maintainers had been successfully flying advanced combat aircraft raised questions about the security of sensitive technologies and the effectiveness of personnel screening procedures. If enlisted personnel could gain unauthorized access to sophisticated fighters and bombers, what did that suggest about the protection of classified systems and information? "This has implications beyond just the personnel involved," a senior Pentagon official had said during a classified briefing to congressional leaders. "Foreign governments are asking questions about our security procedures and the reliability of our technology transfer agreements." Some allied nations had maintainer pilot programs that operated with official approval, and they were privately sharing information about their experiences with Pentagon officials. The Israeli Air Force in particular had long recognized the value of cross-training between pilots and maintainers, and their official programs had produced many of the same benefits that the unauthorized American program had achieved. "The Israelis have been doing this openly for decades," Martinez had pointed out during her research into potential defenses. "Their maintenance quality and pilot situational awareness are among the best in the world, partly because of integrated training programs." This international perspective provided additional evidence that the maintainer pilot concept was sound, even if the specific implementation at American bases had violated regulations. The stress of the investigation was taking a toll on Maria's personal relationships. Her romance with Carlos had become increasingly tense as the legal implications became clearer, and her family was struggling to understand how their daughter had become involved in such a high-profile military scandal. "I don't understand why you couldn't just do your job," Maria's mother, Elena Santos, had said during a difficult phone conversation. "We're so proud of you for serving, but now the whole family is worried about what's going to happen." Maria's father, Miguel, had been more understanding. As a former Air Force maintainer himself, he appreciated the technical challenges and professional dedication that had motivated his daughter's involvement in the program. "You were trying to be the best at what you do," Miguel had said. "I can't fault you for that, even if the way you went about it caused problems." But even Miguel was concerned about the legal and career consequences Maria was facing. The possibility of court-martial and dishonorable discharge would affect not just Maria's future, but her family's reputation in their tight-knit military community. Carlos had been struggling with his own divided loyalties. He supported Maria personally, but his position as a radar technician made him uncomfortable with the regulatory violations involved in the maintainer pilot program. "I believe in following orders and respecting authority," Carlos had explained. During one of their increasingly frequent arguments, "What you all were doing undermines the whole system of military discipline." "But the system was preventing us from doing our jobs as well as we could," Maria had countered. "We were making aircraft safer and more effective, Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Their relationship was reflecting the broader tensions that the investigation had created throughout the Air Force, conflicts between innovation and discipline, between individual initiative and institutional authority, between what was technically possible and what was officially permitted. The formal hearing to determine whether Maria and other key figures in the maintainer pilot program would face court-martial was scheduled for a Monday morning in late September. The hearing would be conducted by a panel of senior officers who would review the evidence and determine the appropriate level of disciplinary action. Maria arrived at the base legal office wearing her dress blue uniform, her ribbons and badges representing 7 years of exemplary service. Beside her sat attorney Susan Martinez, carrying boxes of documentation intended to demonstrate that the maintainer pilot program had been conducted professionally and had contributed to Air Force readiness. Colonel Mitchell was present as the primary witness for the prosecution, along with Senior Airman Moore and several other personnel who had provided testimony about the unauthorized flying activities. The hearing room was packed with observers, other maintainers, pilots, and senior leadership who were curious about how the Air Force would handle this unprecedented situation. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Maria and her co-conspirators had systematically violated regulations by operating military aircraft without proper authorization. They had circumvented safety procedures, compromised security protocols, and undermined military authority through their unauthorized activities. The evidence shows that Staff Sergeant Santos logged over 700 hours of unauthorized flight time in aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The prosecutor, Major William Thompson, no relation to Master Sergeant Jake Thompson, stated, "This represents one of the most serious breaches of military discipline in recent Air Force history." The prosecution presented flight logs, maintenance records, and testimony from witnesses who had observed the unauthorized flying. They emphasized the potential for accidents, the security implications of unauthorized personnel operating sensitive aircraft, and the precedent that would be set if such behavior were not severely punished. But the defense presentation told a different story. Martinez had assembled evidence showing that the maintainer pilot program had operated with remarkable safety, had improved maintenance quality at participating bases, and had been conducted with the knowledge and tacit approval of senior leadership, staff. Sergeant Santos and her colleagues were not criminals, Martinez argued. They were dedicated professionals who recognized that understanding aircraft from a pilot's perspective would make them better maintainers. Their initiative and expertise have contributed to Air Force readiness and safety. The hearing took an unexpected turn when Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was called to testify. Hayes had been transferred to the Pentagon following the investigation, and her testimony was eagerly anticipated by both sides. Hayes was in a difficult position. As an officer who had facilitated and overseen much of the maintainer pilot program, she faced potential charges herself, but she also had first-hand knowledge of the program's benefits and the professionalism with which it had been conducted. "In my 20 years as an Air Force officer," Hayes testified, "I have never worked with maintainers who understood aircraft systems as thoroughly as those who participated in this program. Their insights prevented accidents, improved efficiency, and enhanced our operational capabilities." Hayes described specific instances where maintainers with flying experience had identified problems that traditional diagnostic procedures had missed. She presented data showing that aircraft availability rates were higher and maintenance costs were lower at bases where the program operated. Staff Sergeant Santos personally identified a flight control problem in an F-22 that had grounded the aircraft for over a week. Hayes testified, "Her solution, which came from her understanding of how the aircraft actually flew, saved the Air Force millions of dollars and prevented a potential safety issue." But Hayes also acknowledged that the program had operated outside official channels. and that participants understood they were taking risks by circumventing established procedures. "We believed the benefits justified the risks," she said. "These maintainers became better at their jobs because they understood what they were maintaining." That understanding came from flying the aircraft, not just reading technical manuals. Martinez had prepared a comprehensive technical presentation, demonstrating the innovations and improvements that had resulted from the maintainer pilot program. She presented side-by-side comparisons of maintenance metrics from bases with and without the program, showing consistently superior performance where maintainers had flying experience. Aircraft availability rates were 15% higher at program bases. Maintenance-related incidents were 30% lower. Customer satisfaction ratings from pilots were significantly better when their aircraft were serviced by maintainers with flying experience. "This isn't just about flying," Martinez explained to the hearing panel. "This is about creating a bridge between the operational and maintenance communities that benefits everyone." She presented specific case studies where the program had identified and resolved problems that traditional approaches had missed. A persistent engine vibration in F-16s that had been attributed to normal wear was actually caused by a maintenance procedure that was slightly out of specification. A radar intermittency in F-15s was related to pilot flying techniques rather than equipment problems. These and dozens of other issues had been resolved because maintainers understood both the technical systems and their operational applications. The technical evidence was compelling, but it raised uncomfortable questions for Air Force leadership. If the unauthorized program had produced such clear benefits, why hadn't official training programs incorporated similar approaches? Why were there such rigid barriers between different specialties when integration clearly improved results? A parade of character witnesses testified on Maria's behalf, including pilots whose aircraft she had maintained, fellow maintainers who had worked with her, and supervisors who had observed her professional development over 7 years. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the pilot who had written Maria's most recent performance evaluation, testified about Maria's exceptional technical knowledge and professional dedication. "Staff Sergeant Santos has saved my life multiple times," Walsh said. "Not in dramatic ways, but through her attention to detail and her ability to identify potential problems before they become dangerous. She understands my aircraft better than I do in some ways." Master Sergeant Williams, the maintenance chief, provided testimony about Maria's leadership and mentoring of younger maintainers. "Santos doesn't just fix problems," Williams testified. "She teaches other people how to think about problems. Her knowledge base is extraordinary, and she shares it freely with everyone around her." But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Technical Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, a fellow program participant who had been granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation with the investigation. "Maria Santos is the reason I became a better maintainer," Rodriguez testified. "She showed me that understanding how aircraft fly makes you better at keeping them flying. Everything I learned from her made me more effective at my job." Rodriguez described the informal mentoring and training that had occurred within the program, the safety procedures that had been developed, and the professional standards that participants had maintained. "We weren't cowboys or thrill seekers," Rodriguez said. "We were professionals who wanted to be the best at what we did. Flying the aircraft we maintained made us better maintainers." Major Thompson's rebuttal focused on the fundamental question of military discipline and regulatory compliance. Regardless of the benefits the program might have produced, he argued, military personnel could not be allowed to decide unilaterally which regulations to follow and which to ignore. "The Air Force operates on a foundation of discipline, order, and adherence to established procedures," Thompson argued. "If we excuse regulatory violations because they produce good results, we undermine the entire structure of military authority." He emphasized the potential for accidents and security breaches that the unauthorized flying had created. Military aircraft were sophisticated weapon systems that required extensive training and certification to operate safely. Allowing unauthorized personnel to fly these aircraft, regardless of their technical knowledge, created unacceptable risks. "We have established training programs and certification procedures for pilots," Thompson said. "These exist for good reasons: safety, security, and standardization." Staff Sergeant Santos and her colleagues chose to circumvent these procedures, putting lives and equipment at risk. The prosecution also raised questions about the precedent that would be set if the charges were dismissed or reduced. If maintainers could fly aircraft without authorization, as long as they did so safely and professionally, what other regulations could be ignored in the name of innovation and efficiency? "Military discipline requires that orders be followed and regulations be respected," Thompson concluded. "The defendant's good intentions and professional competence do not excuse her violations of military law." The hearing panel, consisting of Colonel Sarah Davidson, Colonel Robert Kim, and Colonel Michael Torres, retired to consider their decision. All three were experienced officers with backgrounds in operations, maintenance, and legal affairs, respectively. The evidence they had heard presented a complex picture of professional dedication, regulatory violation, and institutional failure. The maintainer-pilot program had clearly violated established procedures, but it had also produced demonstrable benefits for Air Force readiness and safety. Colonel Davidson, who had a background in flight operations, was sympathetic to the argument that cross-training between pilots and maintainers could improve effectiveness. Her own experience suggested that the rigid separation between different specialties sometimes hindered rather than helped operational success. Colonel Kim, with his maintenance background, was impressed by the technical innovations that had emerged from the program. The data showing improved aircraft availability and reduced maintenance incidents was compelling evidence that the program had value beyond its regulatory violations. Colonel Torres, the legal expert, was most concerned about the precedent that would be set by the panel's decision. Military law required consistent application of regulations, regardless of the outcomes that violations might produce. "We're not just deciding what happens to Staff Sergeant Santos," Torres reminded his colleagues during their deliberation. "We're deciding what message the Air Force sends about innovation, initiative, and regulatory compliance." The panel's discussions continued for hours as they struggled to balance competing principles of military justice, operational effectiveness, and institutional reform. When the panel reconvened, the hearing room was packed with observers waiting to learn not just Maria's fate but the Air Force's position on the broader issues raised by the maintainer-pilot program. Colonel Davidson, as the senior member of the panel, delivered the verdict. "This case presents unprecedented questions about the balance between military discipline and operational innovation," Davidson began. "The evidence shows that Staff Sergeant Santos and her colleagues violated regulations systematically and deliberately. However, the evidence also shows that their violations were motivated by professional dedication and resulted in improved Air Force capabilities." The panel had decided on a complex verdict that acknowledged both the regulatory violations and the professional benefits of the program. Staff Sergeant Santos will be reduced in rank to senior airman and will serve 6 months of restriction to base, Davidson announced. However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the demonstrable benefits of her actions, she will not face court-martial or separation from the Air Force. The verdict represented a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but acknowledged the complex realities of the situation. Maria would face significant disciplinary action, but her career would survive and she would remain in the Air Force. More importantly, the panel recommended that the Air Force develop official programs to provide maintainers with flying experience, acknowledging that the unauthorized program had identified genuine gaps in traditional training approaches. The Air Force must find ways to capture the benefits of integrated training while maintaining proper regulatory compliance, Davidson concluded. This case demonstrates both the risks of unauthorized innovation and the costs of excessive regulatory rigidity. We're approaching the climactic moments of this epic tale, and the tension is at its peak. Creating stories of this scope and detail requires not just writing talent, but careful plotting, character development, and attention to every narrative thread. We've journeyed through nearly 40,000 words together, and I hope every moment has kept you engaged. If this story has drawn you in and kept you listening, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share this epic with anyone who loves immersive storytelling and hit that notification bell for more incredible adventures. Now let's witness how everything comes together in these final crucial moments. The hearing's verdict created shockwaves throughout the Air Force that extended far beyond Nellis Air Force Base. While Maria had avoided the worst-case scenario of court-martial and discharge, the reduction in rank and the restriction felt like a profound punishment for someone who had believed she was serving her country with distinction. The demotion from staff sergeant to senior airman meant the loss of leadership responsibilities, a significant reduction in pay, and the painful knowledge that years of exemplary service had been officially deemed insufficient to outweigh her regulatory violations. More painful still was the reaction of younger maintainers who had looked up to her as a mentor and role model. "I don't understand," Airman First Class Jennifer Park had said when she learned of the verdict. "You made all of us better at our jobs. You helped keep pilots safe. How is that worth punishment?" Maria struggled to explain the complexities of military justice and institutional authority to personnel who saw only that expertise and dedication had been punished while mediocrity remained unrewarded. The lesson that many younger maintainers drew from the situation was that initiative and innovation were dangerous, that it was safer to follow procedures exactly than to seek better ways of accomplishing their mission. The aftermath of the hearing created a complex social dynamic on the flight line. Some maintainers treated Maria with increased respect, viewing her as someone who had sacrificed her career for principles she believed in. Others distanced themselves, concerned that association with her might damage their own prospects for advancement. The pilots' reactions were similarly divided. Some appreciated the dedication and professionalism that Maria had demonstrated, while others felt that her actions had undermined the exclusive status and authority that came with pilot training and certification. Captain Walsh, who had testified on Maria's behalf, made a point of continuing to work closely with Maria on aircraft maintenance issues. But other pilots began requesting different crew chiefs, uncomfortable with the complexity of working with someone whose technical knowledge came from sources they couldn't officially acknowledge. "It's like we're all pretending that what happened didn't happen," Carlos observed during one of their increasingly rare conversations. "Everyone knows you're probably the most knowledgeable maintainer on the base, but no one can officially recognize that knowledge." The isolation was perhaps most painful in her interactions with the other members of the former maintainer-pilot network. Thompson had been transferred to another base following his own disciplinary hearing. Hayes was at the Pentagon, where her involvement in the program had actually enhanced her reputation among senior leaders who appreciated innovation and initiative. Others had scattered to assignments around the world, their tight-knit community broken apart by the investigation and its aftermath. The media attention surrounding the maintainer-pilot program had triggered a broader congressional investigation into Air Force training and personnel policies. The House Armed Services Committee had scheduled hearings to examine why such a program had operated without official knowledge and what it revealed about institutional barriers to innovation and cross-training. Maria found herself called to testify before Congress, a prospect that terrified her more than any military disciplinary action. Speaking to a panel of military officers was one thing, Appearing before elected officials and television cameras was entirely different. The congressional hearing room was intimidating, with its formal atmosphere and bright lights from television cameras. Maria sat at a witness table facing a panel of representatives who had varying levels of understanding of military operations and aviation technology. Representative Sarah Martinez, the committee chairwoman, opened the hearing with pointed questions about how the unauthorized flying program had operated without detection for so long. Senior Airman Santos, Representative Martinez began, "Your activities represent either a massive failure of Air Force oversight or a deliberate decision by leadership to ignore unauthorized activities. Which is it?" Maria struggled to answer. Questions that required her to speculate about the motivations and knowledge of senior leaders she had never met. She tried to explain the technical and professional rationale for the maintainer pilot program, but the political nature of the hearing made nuanced discussion difficult. "Did you consider the possibility that your unauthorized flying could result in accidents that would endanger lives and cost taxpayers millions of dollars?" Representative Johnson asked. "Yes, sir," Maria replied. "That's why we maintained such strict safety procedures and documentation. We understood the risks and tried to minimize them." "But you did not have the authority to make that determination," Johnson continued. "That authority belongs to properly trained and certified officers, not enlisted maintainers." The hearing highlighted the fundamental tension between individual initiative and institutional authority that had been at the heart of the maintainer pilot program. Maria found herself defending not just her own actions, but the entire concept of cross-training and innovation within military structures. The congressional testimony thrust Maria into an unwelcome spotlight of national media attention. News organizations that had initially portrayed the maintainer pilot program as a simple case of regulatory violation began exploring the more complex questions of military innovation and institutional reform. Maria was approached by reporters seeking interviews, book deals, and television appearances. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had always preferred to work behind the scenes, focusing on technical challenges rather than public recognition. "I just wanted to be good at my job," Maria told a reporter from 60 Minutes during one of the few interviews she agreed to give. "I never wanted to be famous or controversial. I just wanted to understand the aircraft I was maintaining." The media coverage was generally sympathetic to Maria personally, portraying her as a dedicated professional who had been caught up in institutional failures beyond her control. But the attention also brought unwanted scrutiny to her family, friends, and colleagues who had been drawn into the story. Carlos found the media attention particularly difficult. As someone who valued privacy and had not been directly involved in the maintainer pilot program, he struggled with suddenly being identified as the boyfriend of the rogue pilot in news articles and television reports. "I didn't sign up for this," Carlos told Maria during one of their most difficult conversations. "I support what you did, but I can't handle having my personal life discussed on national television." The national attention surrounding Maria's case created unexpected strains within her family. Her parents were proud of their daughter's dedication and technical expertise, but they were also concerned about the long-term impact on her career and reputation. Miguel Santos found himself defending his daughter to neighbors and colleagues, who questioned why she hadn't simply followed orders and avoided controversy. As a former military maintainer himself, he understood the professional motivations behind Maria's actions, but he also worried about the personal cost she was paying. "She did what she thought was right," Miguel told a local news reporter who had tracked down the Santos family. "She wanted to be the best maintainer she could be, and that meant understanding how the aircraft actually flew." Elena Santos was more conflicted about the media attention and its impact on the family's reputation in their community. She had always been proud of Maria's military service, but the complexity of the current situation made it difficult to know how to respond to questions from friends and neighbors. "I don't understand why this had to become such a big deal," Elena confided to her husband. "Maria was just trying to do her job better. Why are people treating her like a criminal?" The family dynamics were further complicated by the reactions of Maria's younger brother, David, who was considering joining the Air Force himself. David was proud of his sister's technical achievements, but he was also concerned about how her reputation might affect his own military career prospects. The maintainer pilot program investigation was having effects throughout the Air Force that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Bases were conducting reviews of their training and cross-training programs, looking for unauthorized activities, but also examining whether official programs were meeting the needs of modern aircraft maintenance. Some commanders were implementing new policies that increased barriers between different specialties, concerned about preventing future unauthorized programs. Others were exploring ways to provide maintainers with legitimate opportunities to gain flight experience and operational understanding. The Air Force's senior leadership was divided about how to respond to the issues raised by the investigation. Some officials saw the unauthorized flying as a serious breach of discipline that required firm response to prevent future violations. Others recognized that the program had identified genuine gaps in training and personnel development that needed to be addressed. General Patricia Davis, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, had ordered a comprehensive review of training programs and personnel policies to determine what changes might be needed. "We need to find ways to capture the innovation and dedication that motivated this program while maintaining proper authority and safety standards," General Davis had said during a Pentagon briefing. "The challenge is creating official programs that achieve the same benefits without the regulatory violations." The review was examining successful international programs, such as those operated by the Israeli Air Force, that provided maintainers with flying experience as part of their official training. But implementing similar programs in the American military would require significant changes to regulations, training procedures, and cultural attitudes about the roles of different specialties. The ongoing stress and uncertainty surrounding Maria's situation was taking an increasingly severe toll on her relationship with Carlos. What had started as disagreements about the wisdom of the maintainer pilot program had evolved into fundamental questions about their compatibility and shared values. "I need to know that this is over," Carlos said during a conversation that both of them knew was likely to end their relationship. "I need to know that you're not going to find other ways to push boundaries and create controversy." Maria struggled to make that promise, not because she wanted to create problems, but because she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't again find herself in situations where her professional judgment conflicted with official policies. "I can't promise to be mediocre," Maria replied. "I can't promise to ignore problems or accept inefficiency just because fixing them might be controversial." The conversation revealed fundamental differences in their approaches to authority, risk, and professional responsibility. Carlos valued stability and clear guidelines, while Maria was driven by a desire to excel and improve systems regardless of bureaucratic constraints. "Maybe we're just too different," Carlos said, with evident sadness. "I love you, but I can't live with the constant uncertainty about what you might do next." The end of their relationship left Maria feeling more isolated than ever. Carlos had been her primary source of emotional support during the investigation and its aftermath, and losing that support made the professional challenges she was facing even more difficult to bear. As her official relationships became more complicated and her romantic relationship ended, Maria found unexpected support from former members of the maintainer pilot network who were facing their own challenges. Despite being scattered to different bases around the world, they maintained contact through unofficial channels and provided mutual support during their individual struggles with the aftermath of the investigation. Thompson, now assigned to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, had been promoted despite his involvement in the program, partly because his new commander appreciated the innovative maintenance procedures he had developed. He regularly sent emails with technical insights and encouragement to other network members. "What we did was right," Thompson wrote in one message. "The fact that it was against regulations doesn't change the fact that it made us better at our jobs and made aircraft safer." Rodriguez, assigned to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, had been selected for advanced technical training, partly because of the exceptional system knowledge she had demonstrated. She was quietly working to incorporate insights from the maintainer pilot program into official training curricula. Hayes, at the Pentagon, was serving on committees examining training and personnel policies. She was in a position to influence official decisions about cross-training and integration between different specialties, working to create legitimate opportunities for the kind of innovation that had characterized the unauthorized program. "We planted seeds," Hayes wrote to Maria. "The ideas we developed and the benefits we demonstrated aren't going away just because the program was shut down. Change takes time in large institutions, but it does happen." Despite the disciplinary actions and media scrutiny, Maria's technical expertise remained exceptional, and she gradually found opportunities to contribute to Air Force operations in ways that didn't violate regulations, but still utilized her unique knowledge base. She was selected to participate in a working group examining maintenance procedures for new aircraft systems, where her insights into the operational implications of technical decisions proved valuable. Her ability to understand problems from both maintainer and pilot perspectives made her contributions unusually comprehensive and practical. When a visiting F-35 Lightning II developed a complex avionics problem that stumped the local maintenance team, Maria was called in to assist with the diagnosis. Her recommendation to check software interaction issues that weren't covered in standard diagnostic procedures led to the discovery of a previously unknown bug that was affecting multiple aircraft. Santos sees things that other people miss. The F-35 pilot had told his squadron commander, "She understands how these systems actually work in flight, not just how they're supposed to work on paper." But these professional successes were bittersweet for Maria. While she was grateful for opportunities to contribute her expertise, she was also acutely aware that her knowledge came from sources she couldn't officially acknowledge. She was forced to present insights gained from flying experience as intuitive understanding or theoretical knowledge. The gap between her actual qualifications and her official credentials created a constant tension that affected her interactions with colleagues and supervisors. She was arguably one of the most knowledgeable aircraft specialists on the base, but she couldn't fully explain or demonstrate the sources of that knowledge. 6 months after the congressional hearings, the Air Force began implementing sweeping changes to its training and personnel development programs. The maintainer pilot investigation had revealed systemic issues that went far beyond unauthorized flying, including inadequate cross-training, rigid specialty boundaries, and insufficient opportunities for innovation and initiative. General Davis announced the creation of the Advanced Technical Training Initiative, which would provide selected maintainers with flight experience as part of their official development. The program would be carefully regulated and safety-focused, but it would officially recognize the value of operational understanding for maintenance personnel. "We have learned that artificial barriers between specialties can hinder rather than help our mission effectiveness," General Davis announced during a Pentagon press conference. "This initiative will provide legitimate opportunities for cross-training that will benefit both maintenance quality and flight safety." Maria watched the announcement from her dormitory room at Nellis, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and frustration. The official program incorporated many of the principles and procedures that the unauthorized network had developed, but she and her colleagues were unlikely to benefit from the reforms they had helped inspire. The irony was painful. Their unofficial innovations were being adopted officially, But the innovators themselves were considered too controversial to participate in the legitimate programs. They had proven that maintainer pilot training was valuable, but they had also shown that unauthorized approaches to achieving that training were unacceptable. Despite the official reforms, Maria faced a personal decision that would define the rest of her Air Force career. The Advanced Technical Training Initiative had established a selection committee to identify maintainers who would participate in the new official flight training program. The committee needed personnel with exceptional technical knowledge and demonstrated leadership capabilities. Colonel Mitchell, who had led the original investigation, was serving on the selection committee. Despite their adversarial history, he had developed a grudging respect for Maria's professional competence and dedication. When her name appeared on the list of potential candidates, he found himself in the unexpected position of advocating for someone he had once sought to court-martial. Senior Airman Santos has the technical knowledge and system understanding that this program is designed to develop, Mitchell told the committee during their deliberations. Her previous unauthorized activities demonstrate both the risks of unregulated innovation and the potential benefits of integrated training. Other committee members were divided about Maria's candidacy. Some felt that including her in the official program would reward her previous regulatory violations and send the wrong message about military discipline. Others argued that excluding someone with her qualifications would waste valuable expertise and perpetuate the institutional failures that had led to the unauthorized program. The debate reflected broader questions about redemption, institutional learning, and the balance between punishment and pragmatism. Should the Air Force exclude personnel who had demonstrated valuable capabilities through unauthorized means, or should it find ways to channel their expertise into legitimate programs? The selection process for the Advanced Technical Training Initiative included a comprehensive evaluation that tested both technical knowledge and flight aptitude. Candidates who had never flown before would undergo simulator testing and basic flight training. But for those with existing flight experience, whether officially documented or not, the evaluation would include actual flight demonstrations. Maria's evaluation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November, almost a year after Colonel Mitchell had first confronted her with the black logbook. She would fly an F-16 with an instructor pilot, demonstrating her technical knowledge and flight skills while being assessed for inclusion in the official program. The irony was inescapable. She was being tested on capabilities she had developed through unauthorized means, evaluated by instructors who were trying to determine whether she was qualified for training she had essentially already completed. The flight would either validate her unconventional path to expertise or demonstrate that unauthorized training was an adequate preparation for official standards. Captain Sarah Chun, the Thunderbird pilot whose aircraft Maria had repaired years earlier, served as the evaluating instructor. Chun was one of the Air Force's most experienced pilots, and her assessment would carry significant weight with the selection committee. "I know your background," Chun told Maria during their pre-flight briefing. "Today we're not concerned with how you learn to fly. We're only interested in whether you can fly safely and professionally." The evaluation flight included a comprehensive test of basic piloting skills, emergency procedures, and advanced maneuvers. Maria was required to demonstrate takeoffs and landings, air-to-air intercepts, formation flying, and responses to simulated emergencies. As they climbed into the clear Nevada sky, Maria felt a familiar sense of belonging and competence. The F-16 responded to her inputs with precision, and her understanding of the aircraft systems was evident in her smooth, confident handling of complex maneuvers. "Execute a tactical approach to runway 21, Chun instructed, testing Maria's ability to handle demanding flight scenarios. Maria's approach was flawless, demonstrating the kind of system integration and situational awareness that typically took years of training to develop. Chun found herself impressed despite her expectations. Recognizing that Maria's unconventional training had produced genuinely exceptional capabilities. "Where did you learn to execute a tactical approach like that?" Chun asked during their post-flight. "Debrief, trial and error," Maria replied honestly. "And a lot of help from instructors who believed in what we were trying to accomplish." Chun's evaluation report was unequivocal. Maria possessed flight skills and system knowledge that exceeded the requirements for the Advanced Technical Training Initiative. Her technical understanding was superior to many officially trained pilots, and her flying abilities demonstrated both natural aptitude and extensive experience. "Senior Airman Santos is already qualified for the advanced phases of this program," Chun wrote in her assessment. "Her flying skills and technical knowledge exceed the standards we're seeking to develop. The question is not whether she can benefit from this training, but whether the program can benefit from her participation." The recommendation created a dilemma for the selection committee. Including Maria would acknowledge that unauthorized training could produce qualified results, potentially encouraging future regulatory violations. Excluding her would waste exceptional capabilities and suggest that the Air Force was more concerned with punishment than performance. Colonel Mitchell found himself in the unexpected position of being Maria's strongest advocate on the committee. His investigation had convinced him that the maintainer pilot program, despite its regulatory violations, had produced genuinely valuable results that the Air Force needed to capture and utilize. "We can either learn from this situation or repeat it," Mitchell argued during the committee's final deliberations. Santos and her colleagues identified real gaps in our training programs. "We can incorporate their insights and expertise, or we can exclude them and lose the benefits of their experience." The committee's decision would send a signal throughout the Air Force about institutional attitudes toward innovation, redemption, and the balance between discipline and effectiveness. The selection committee's decision was announced on a Friday afternoon in December, exactly 13 months after the black logbook had been discovered. Maria was selected for the Advanced Technical Training Initiative, but with conditions that reflected the complexity of her situation. She would participate in the program as both a student and an instructor, learning official procedures while sharing insights from her unauthorized experience. Her role would be carefully structured to ensure that her contributions were properly channeled and documented within legitimate training frameworks. Senior Airman Santos will serve as a bridge between the maintainer and pilot communities, Colonel Mitchell announced during the selection briefing. Her unique background provides valuable insights that will help us develop more effective training programs. The decision represented a form of institutional redemption for Maria, acknowledging that her unauthorized activities had produced valuable expertise that the Air Force needed to utilize, but it also established clear boundaries about how that expertise would be applied and shared. Maria's participation in the official program would be closely monitored and documented. She would be required to complete all standard training modules, even those covering material she had already mastered. Through unauthorized means, her contributions to program development would be carefully reviewed to ensure they met official standards and safety requirements. The Advanced Technical Training Initiative began operations in January, with Maria among the first class of maintainer pilots to participate in the official program. The training facility at Nellis had been expanded and modernized, incorporating lessons learned from the investigation and feedback from international allies who operated similar programs. Maria found herself in the unusual position of being simultaneously a student and an expert. The official curriculum covered material she had learned years earlier through unauthorized means, but it also provided structure and standardization that the informal program had lacked. "This is what we were trying to create," Thompson told her during a phone call from Germany. Official recognition that maintainers benefit from flight experience. "It took longer than we hoped, but the idea finally won." The other students in the program came from diverse backgrounds. some with extensive maintenance experience but no flying background, others with civilian pilot licenses but limited military aviation knowledge. Maria's combination of technical expertise and flight experience made her a natural mentor and resource for the group, but the official program also imposed constraints that the unauthorized network had avoided. Every flight was carefully planned and documented. Training progression followed established timelines regardless of individual capabilities. Innovation and experimentation were limited by safety and regulatory requirements. "It's more restrictive than what we used to do," Rodriguez observed during a visit to Nellis. "But it's also sustainable and legitimate. That's worth the trade-offs." As the official program developed and Maria's role within it became established, she began to understand that her journey from unauthorized pilot to official instructor represented more than personal redemption. It reflected broader changes in how military institutions could adapt to innovation while maintaining discipline and safety. The black logbook that had nearly ended her career became a resource for program development. The detailed documentation she had maintained of her unauthorized flights provided insights into training progression, safety procedures, and the integration of technical and operational knowledge. "Your logbook is helping us design better training curricula," Colonel Hayes told Maria during a visit from the Pentagon. "The documentation you maintained shows how maintainers can safely and effectively develop flight skills." Hayes had been promoted and was now overseeing similar programs at multiple bases around the world. The maintainer-pilot concept was being adopted internationally, with the American program serving as a model for allied air forces seeking to improve maintenance quality and operational effectiveness. The investigation that had once threatened Maria's career was now cited as an example of how military institutions could learn from unauthorized innovation while establishing proper frameworks for future development. The painful process of exposure, investigation, and reform had ultimately produced beneficial changes that strengthened the Air Force. A year after the initial congressional hearings, the House Armed Services Committee scheduled follow-up sessions to review the progress of the Advanced Technical Training Initiative and assess the lessons learned from the maintainer pilot investigation. Maria was again called to testify, but this time as a success story rather than a regulatory violator. Her transformation from unauthorized pilot to official instructor represented the kind of institutional adaptation that congressional oversight was designed to encourage. Senior Airman Santos, Representative Martinez began, "How would you compare your current official training role with your previous unauthorized activities?" "Ma'am, the official program provides structure and legitimacy that our informal network couldn't offer," Maria replied. "We're accomplishing the same basic goals, helping maintainers understand aircraft from a pilot's perspective, but we're doing it safely and legally." The congressional hearing highlighted the positive outcomes that had emerged from the investigation. Aircraft maintenance quality had continued to improve, pilot satisfaction with maintenance services had increased, and several innovative procedures developed by the program were being adopted throughout the Air Force. But Maria also testified about the personal and professional costs of the unauthorized approach, emphasizing that institutional change was preferable to individual regulatory violations. "What we did was effective, but it was also risky and unsustainable," she told the committee. "The official program achieves the same benefits without the legal and career risks that we faced." Representative Johnson, who had been critical during the initial hearings, acknowledged the positive developments while emphasizing the importance of working within established systems. "This case demonstrates that military personnel can drive institutional change through proper channels," Johnson said. "Innovation and improvement are possible without circumventing authority and regulations." The success of the Advanced Technical Training Initiative attracted attention from allied air forces around the world. many of whom sent observers to study the program and consider implementing similar approaches. Maria found herself serving as a liaison with international visitors, sharing insights about the integration of maintenance and flight training. The Israeli Air Force, which had operated maintainer pilot programs for decades, sent a delegation to compare approaches and share lessons learned. The exchange provided validation that the concepts the unauthorized American program had developed were consistent with successful international practices. "You discovered independently what we have known for many years," Colonel David Roth, the Israeli delegation leader, told Maria during a technical discussion. "Maintainers who understand flight operations are more effective than those who work only on the ground." The international recognition was particularly meaningful for Maria because it demonstrated that her controversial path to expertise had led to genuine professional competence. Foreign experts who had no knowledge of the political and regulatory controversies surrounding her background evaluated her purely on technical merit and found her knowledge impressive. The program began hosting international students, with maintainers from allied nations participating in training alongside American personnel. Maria's role expanded to include international instruction, requiring her to develop teaching skills and cultural sensitivity to work effectively with diverse groups. The stability and cultural legitimacy of the official program provided Maria with opportunities for personal growth that had been difficult to pursue during the uncertainty following the investigation. She enrolled in college courses to complete her bachelor's degree, taking advantage of Air Force education benefits to study aerospace engineering and management. Her relationship with Carlos had ended permanently, but the experience had taught her valuable lessons about compatibility and communication. When she began dating Captain Michael Torres, a test pilot assigned to the program as an instructor, she was more careful about ensuring that their professional and personal values were aligned. "I need to be with someone who understands that pushing boundaries is part of who I am," Maria told Torres during one of their early conversations. "I'm not looking for someone to restrain me, but I need someone who can support me when I take calculated risks." Torres, whose own career had involved experimental flying and innovation, appreciated Maria's dedication to excellence and her willingness to challenge conventional approaches. Their relationship developed within the context of shared professional interests and mutual respect for each other's expertise. The personal stability that came with a supportive relationship and legitimate professional recognition allowed Maria to heal from the trauma of the investigation and its aftermath. She began to see her controversial past as a necessary step in a journey toward meaningful contribution rather than as a permanent stain on her career. As the Advanced Technical Training Initiative matured and expanded to other bases, Maria took an increasing responsibility for mentoring new participants and developing training curricula. Her unique background, having learned through both unauthorized and official means, provided insights that benefited both program development and individual instruction. She worked with younger maintainers who were participating in the legitimate program, helping them understand not just the technical aspects of flying, but the professional and ethical frameworks that governed military aviation. Her own experience with regulatory violations provided powerful examples of why proper procedures and authority structures were important. "I made mistakes that nearly cost me my career," she would tell new students. "You have the opportunity to develop the same capabilities through legitimate means. Take advantage of that opportunity and avoid the risks I took." But she also shared the passion and dedication that had motivated her unauthorized flying, encouraging students to pursue excellence and innovation within appropriate frameworks. The balance between caution and ambition was delicate, but her personal experience with both approaches provided credible guidance. Her mentorship extended beyond technical training to career development and personal growth. Many of the maintainers who participated in the program went on to positions of increased responsibility, carrying forward the integrated approach to maintenance and operations that Maria had helped develop. The broader institutional changes that had emerged from the maintainer-pilot investigation continued to evolve and expand throughout the Air Force. The rigid specialty boundaries that had once prevented cross-training were being replaced by more flexible approaches that encouraged integration and innovation. New maintenance procedures developed through the program were being adopted Air Force-wide, improving aircraft availability and reducing maintenance costs. The insights gained from maintainers with flight experience were informing aircraft design decisions and operational procedures in ways that traditional approaches had not achieved. Maria's role in these broader changes was both significant and largely behind the scenes. Her technical contributions were incorporated into official policies and procedures, but her controversial background meant that her involvement was often not publicly acknowledged. "You're having more impact than you realize," General Davis told Maria during a visit to the program. "The ideas you helped develop are changing how we think about maintenance and operations throughout the Air Force." The general's recognition was personally meaningful for Maria, but she had learned to find satisfaction in contributing to institutional improvement, regardless of public recognition. The knowledge that her work was making aircraft safer and more effective was sufficient reward for the risks and sacrifices her journey had required. As the program entered its third year of operation, Maria was selected for promotion to Staff Sergeant, restoring the rank she had lost following the disciplinary hearing. The promotion represented official recognition that her contributions to the Air Force outweighed her past regulatory violations, but more importantly, she was selected to lead the development of advanced training modules that would extend the program to new aircraft types and operational scenarios. The assignment would require her to work with manufacturers, test pilots, and senior leadership to create training programs for next-generation aircraft systems. "We need someone who understands both the technical and operational aspects of this challenge," Colonel Mitchell told her during the assignment briefing. "Your background gives you insights that traditional training development doesn't provide." The assignment represented the culmination of Maria's journey from unauthorized pilot to official expert. She would be responsible for creating legitimate training programs that incorporated the lessons learned from her controversial past while meeting the highest standards of safety and regulatory compliance. Working with the development team, Maria helped design training scenarios that provided maintainers with comprehensive understanding of aircraft systems and operational requirements. The programs incorporated simulation technology, carefully controlled flight experience, and extensive safety procedures that ensured training value while minimizing risks. 5 years after Colonel Mitchell had first confronted her with the black logbook, Maria stood in the same spot on the Nellis flight line where her secret had been revealed. But now she was wearing the insignia of a staff sergeant and the badge of a senior instructor in the Advanced Technical Training Initiative, the F-16. She was preparing for a training flight, was equipped with the latest avionics and systems. But the basic aircraft was the same type she had first flown during those clandestine nights with Thompson and Hayes. The difference was that now her flights were officially authorized, carefully planned, and properly documented. "Ready for takeoff, Instructor Santos?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a new pilot who was participating in the program to gain maintainer perspectives on aircraft systems. "Roger that," Maria replied, settling into the familiar cockpit that had once been forbidden's territory. "Let's go. See what this aircraft can teach us today." As the F-16 lifted off from the same runway where her unauthorized flying had begun, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from regulatory violator to official instructor. The path had been painful and controversial, but it had ultimately led to institutional changes that benefited the entire Air Force. The black logbook that had nearly ended her career now resided in the program's historical archives, serving as a reminder of how unauthorized innovation could spark legitimate reform. The detailed records she had maintained of her clandestine flights had become a resource for training development and safety analysis. "This is Instructor 1. We're established in the training area," Maria radioed to the tower using the call sign that represented her official status and legitimate authority. Below them, the Nevada desert stretched to the horizon, the same landscape over which she had flown in secret for years. But now her flights were part of an official program that was training the next generation of maintainer pilots, ensuring that the knowledge and capabilities she had developed would continue to benefit the Air Force long after her own career ended. The investigation that had once threatened to destroy her career had ultimately validated the principles she had fought for. Innovation and excellence were possible within legitimate frameworks, but institutional change required individuals willing to challenge conventional approaches and accept the risks of pushing boundaries. As they began the training scenarios that would help Lieutenant Kim understand aircraft systems from both maintenance and operational perspectives, Maria knew that her controversial journey had been worthwhile. The Air Force was stronger because maintainers and pilots were learning to work together more effectively, and aircraft were safer because technical expertise was being combined with operational understanding. The black logbook had revealed her secret, but it had also revealed the potential for positive change that came from questioning artificial boundaries and seeking better ways to accomplish the mission. That legacy would continue long after the individual controversies were forgotten. The 5th anniversary of the Advanced Technical Training Initiative was marked by a ceremony at Nellis Air Force Base that brought together current participants, program graduates, and the original personnel who had been involved in both the unauthorized network and the official investigation. Thompson returned from his assignment in Germany, now a Chief Master Sergeant whose innovative maintenance procedures had been adopted throughout the European theater. Hayes attended as a newly promoted Brigadier General, her role in program development having enhanced rather than hindered her career progression. Even Colonel Mitchell, now a general himself and serving at Air Force headquarters, participated in the ceremony that celebrated the program's achievements and acknowledged the complex history that had led to its creation. "This program demonstrates that institutions can learn and adapt," General Mitchell said during his remarks. "Mistakes were made on all sides, but we were able to transform controversy into constructive change." Maria was recognized during the ceremony as the program's senior instructor and primary curriculum developer. The recognition was personally meaningful, but she was more proud of the hundreds of maintainer pilots who had been trained through legitimate channels and were now serving throughout the Air Force. "5 years ago, I thought my career was over," Maria said during her own remarks. "I had violated regulations in pursuit of professional excellence, and I was facing serious consequences for those choices. But the Air Force found a way to channel the energy and ideas behind those violations into positive institutional change." She looked out at an audience that included many of the younger maintainers she had mentored, pilots she had trained to understand maintenance perspectives, and senior leaders who had supported the program's development. "The lesson isn't that regulations should be ignored in pursuit of good intentions," she continued. "The lesson is that good intentions and innovative ideas need to be channeled through legitimate processes. Change is possible, but it requires patience, persistence, and willingness to work within institutional frameworks." A decade after the black logbook incident, Senior Master Sergeant Maria Santos stood before a class of new Advanced Technical Training Initiative participants at the program's permanent facility at Nellis Air Force Base. The program had expanded to include multiple aircraft types and had been adopted by air forces around the world. The students in her current class included maintainers from the United States, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom, all learning to integrate technical expertise with operational understanding. The international scope of the program demonstrated how local innovation could become global best practice when properly developed and implemented. Who can tell me why a maintainer benefits from understanding flight operations? Maria asked the class, beginning a discussion that would cover technical systems, operational requirements, and the professional principles that governed military aviation. The answers from the students reflected sophisticated understanding of the integration between maintenance and operations that had become standard throughout modern air forces. The concepts that had once been controversial were now accepted doctrine, taught in official curricula and supported by extensive research and documentation. After class, Maria walked to her office in the program headquarters building, where the walls were decorated with photos of graduates, technical innovations, and international cooperation agreements. The black logbook that had started everything was displayed in a place of honor, representing both the risks of unauthorized innovation and the potential for positive institutional change. Her phone rang with a call from Colonel Torres, now her husband of 7 years, who was serving as a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base. Their relationship had survived multiple deployments and career changes, built on mutual respect for each other's professional dedication and shared commitment. TO excellence. How was class today? Torres asked. Excellent, Maria replied. These new students are exceptionally motivated. I think this class is going to produce some outstanding maintainer pilots. They talked about their respective work, their plans for the weekend, and the ordinary details of a successful military marriage. Maria's life had found a balance between professional achievement and personal happiness that had seemed impossible during the dark days following the investigation. As she prepared to leave the office, Maria paused to look at the photo on her desk showing the first graduating class of the Advanced Technical Training Initiative. She was standing with her students in front of an F-16, all of them wearing flight suits and displaying the confident expressions of people who had mastered challenging skills through legitimate means. The photo represented more than professional achievement. It symbolized the possibility of redemption, growth, and positive change even after serious mistakes. The unauthorized flying that had nearly ended her career had ultimately led to contributions that strengthened the Air Force and improved aviation safety. Walking out to the flight line where it all began, Maria reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a secret pilot washing jets to a senior instructor training the next generation of maintainer pilots. The path had been difficult and controversial, but it had led to meaningful change that would benefit military aviation for years to come. The sun was setting over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors that reflected off the aircraft parked on the flight line. These were the same types of fighters she had once flown in secret, but now they were maintained and operated by personnel who understood both technical systems and operational requirements through legitimate training. Official authorization. As she drove home to a life that had found stability and purpose through official channels, Maria knew that her story would continue to serve as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration for future generations of military personnel. The black logbook had revealed her secret, but it had also revealed the potential for positive change that came from the courage to challenge conventional approaches and the wisdom to channel innovation through legitimate frameworks. The investigation that had once threatened to destroy her career had become the foundation for reforms that strengthened the institution she served. That transformation, more than any individual achievement, represented the true legacy of her controversial journey from unauthorized pilot to official instructor. What an absolutely incredible journey we've shared together. A full 50,000 words of adventure, character growth, and storytelling. Creating a story of this magnitude requires months of planning, writing, and careful narration to ensure every detail is perfect and every moment keeps you engaged. This has been the equivalent of a complete novella crafted specifically for this format. If this epic story moved you, inspired you, or simply entertained you through this incredible journey, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more amazing long-form stories. Share this with anyone who loves compelling narratives and has the patience for truly epic storytelling. Hit that notification bell to be the first to hear our newest content. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community and for joining me on this remarkable adventure. I'll see you in the next incredible tale. 20 years had passed since that fateful day when Colonel Mitchell discovered the black logbook that would change everything. Senior Master Sergeant Maria Santos, now 46, stood before the newly unveiled statue at Nellis Air Force Base, a bronze figure of a maintainer and pilot working together, symbolizing the integration that had transformed military aviation. The Santos Memorial Program, as it had been officially named, had trained over 10,000 maintainer pilots worldwide. Aircraft safety had improved by 60%, maintenance efficiency by 40%, and the rigid barriers between specialties had largely disappeared throughout modern air forces. Maria's daughter, Second Lieutenant Elena Santos Torres, stood beside her in crisp blues. Elena had followed her mother's path, but through legitimate channels, earning her engineering degree, completing officer training, and becoming both a certified pilot and maintenance officer through the official program. "Mom, do you ever regret the way it all started?" Elena asked, studying the inscription that read, "Dedicated to those who dare to innovate within the bounds of honor, courage, and commitment." Maria smiled, thinking of Thompson, now retired and running a civilian aviation training company. Hayes, who had become the first female chief of staff of the Air Force. And even Mitchell, whose investigation had sparked the greatest training reform in Air Force history. "Every mistake taught us something valuable," Maria replied. "The unauthorized flying was wrong, but it revealed possibilities that changed everything." Sometimes the most important innovations come from people willing to risk everything for what they believe in, as long as they're eventually willing to do things the right way. As the ceremony concluded and Maria watched current students practicing in the same aircraft she had once flown in secret, she opened a worn leather notebook, not the original black logbook, which resided in the Air Force Museum, but a new one documenting her official flights as an instructor. The final entry read, "Mission accomplished. Innovation achieved through proper channels. Legacy secured for future generations." The black logbook had revealed her secret, but more importantly, it had revealed the boundless potential that emerged when courage met wisdom, when innovation embraced legitimacy, and when individual excellence served institutional transformation. Her story would continue inspiring maintainers and pilots for generations to come, not as an example of successful rule-breaking, but as proof that the right ideas, pursued through the right channels, could change the world. Thank you for joining us on this incredible 50,000-word journey. This epic tale required months of research, writing, and meticulous storytelling to bring you a complete novella-length experience. Stories like this represent hundreds of hours of creative work, all crafted to transport you into another world. If this story captivated you, moved you, or simply entertained you through this remarkable adventure, like this video to show your support for epic long-form storytelling. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible full-length narratives. With fellow story lovers who appreciate truly immersive content. Hit the notification bell to never miss our latest epic adventures. Your support makes these massive storytelling projects possible and helps us continue creating the kind of detailed, engaging content that truly transports you. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community. See you in the next incredible tale.